One of the most common questions I get asked in the custom sneaker industry is, how much should I be charging for my customs? And I think this is quite an important topic because for so many people, they put so much time and effort and investment in their craft and their skill, but they have absolutely no idea how to sell their work or what value they should put on them. So in this video, I'm going to try and shed some light on helping you understand how you should price your customs. Even though there is a large subjective element to it, I'll help you understand which parts should be subjective and which parts shouldn't. And second to that, I want to speak a little bit about the customer psychology, or what many customers are sometimes thinking and how that can complicate this process significantly. So let's get into it. We'll start with that second one. More often than not, when somebody messages my business and they want to find out more about custom sneakers, I'll get a message that goes somewhere along the line of, "Hey, I heard you do custom sneakers. How much is it?" Or "What would it cost?" Or sometimes just "How much?" And it drives me absolutely up the wall because how long is a piece of string? I think that a lot of people who want custom art on their shoes, and from here on out, I'll call them customers or clients, they don't really have a good understanding of what goes into the process. And that is so evident by them asking such a question like, how much? And oftentimes I want to sort of humorously say, well, like if you want a simple Mickey Mouse design with no background, no frills, no anything else, it's going to be quite a lot cheaper than if you want Mona Lisa holding a machine gun riding a cyborg shark. There is a lot that goes into formulating the design before we can even give a realistic or even close to realistic quote. Now, obviously, you don't let that frustration or that sass show through, but I'll show you some examples. I mean, if you have a look at this design, this is a simple Minnie Mouse design. This would be very quick and easy to do. There's no background, no fades, nothing special. We're not going over the sock liner. Relatively straightforward, not the easiest right off the bat, but it's quite simple. Now, as you can imagine, this is going to be completely different from something like this. This Transformer pair has 4 detailed characters, one on each side. You know, the actual art involves a couple of fades, it's got airbrush glowing, it's got really detailed character work, we've got scratches and glowing embers, we've got custom laces, we've dyed the sock liner, you can even see, it's not visible in this picture, but we even dyed the tongue. So a huge amount more work and time goes into something like this than something simple like a Minnie Mouse pair for a toddler. However, oftentimes customers come into the situation not really thinking about what they want. They just either have an idea or they say, hey, I've got these shoes and I want to do something with them. So there are a couple of really important questions that we customizers need to ask before we can give you a realistic answer. And some of these questions are, what's your idea? Like, what kind of design do you have in mind? Is it going to be simple color blocking, or are you wanting an anime pair? Or are you wanting something that's going to stand out on the global scale? So asking that question is kind of important. The next question you need to ask is, what size is the shoe? If you're doing a little Minnie Mouse on a tiny little toddler pair, it's going to take a significantly different amount of time for a size 12 giant man's pair of shoes. It's also going to impact the amount of materials that you're going to need to do the project. Thirdly, the style of the shoe also plays a huge role. If we look back at this image, this is a little mini Air Force One. We've got a couple of different panels that need to be handled here. We've got the Nike swoosh, and we've got this panel here, and we've got the upper laces tab. To get a good amount of detail in this on a small scale, it's going to require quite a bit of work. However, completely different to that, if we have a look at these Transformers pair on Jordan 1s, there you can see we've removed the swoosh actually. There was a swoosh, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 different panels. Sometimes if there's a swoosh, that's 5 different panels. And quite a lot of work will go into preparing that surface as well as the kind of detail that you can get out of it. So that's something really worth considering before doing a pair. Another example here is these Pickle Rick Porsche shoes that we've done as well. We had to remove the swoosh because we wanted nice, clear, quality work, and we wouldn't be able to do that with all these different panels. Now, taking the swoosh off takes quite a lot of time and effort, so you kind of have to factor that in as well. On the other hand, if you're working on something like a pair of canvas shoes, like these Starry Night Vans, you don't need to do any sanding, you don't need to do any acetone, you just have to put a base coat. So the type of shoe that you're working on really plays a large role on how much it's going to cost. The next question you need to ask is, what level of detail are they after? So, for example, a customer asked me to do a pair of Vinland Saga custom sneakers. So the actual question or the actual quote came from somebody else's art. They said, how much would it be to do this piece of art? Now, the detail is not really good on this pair. So sorry if you did this pair and you're watching this video. The quality of work is not really that good. I mean, it's fairly simple. It's a very simple anime character. There are no background details. There are no fades. It's just sort of color blocking, really. Now, something like this might be significantly cheaper than these digital designs that are provided. So something like this is going to cost significantly more. So the level of detail plays a really large role. And as you can see here, this I would consider a simple to medium kind of pair because of the level of detail. However, something like, well, we'll go to Pickle Rick Porsche again. Something like this is going to require an immense amount of detail and finesse and precision. So that's something that it's really hard to clarify with the customer ahead of time, and it might be something that you might have to suggest yourself. And the last one, and this one is a little bit difficult, and it really depends on their budget. And very few customers are going to come up to you and say, oh, I've got a budget of $300 to do this art, like do something nice for me. Nobody's going to say that. They're going to say, how much is it? And they're going to want it to be as low as possible. So while you are suggesting a cost without knowing anything about their budget, it puts you in a little bit of a tricky situation. Do you quote something really low for the likelihood that they'll get it? Perhaps maybe you say, oh, I'll do it for $100, even though it's worth like $200, $220. Or do you go high and back yourself and say, it's a lot of work, this is art, and I really just think that this is what it's worth, and they might turn around and say, whoa, that's like way over budget. So it's a very difficult dance to do, and I am going to talk a little bit more about how you can navigate that in a bit. But in short, from your customer's perspective, and customers, from your perspective, it's really hard for a customizer or any artist to provide any kind of accurate quote or estimate without knowing what it is that you want, because our entire purpose is to make something that will suit what you want. So a couple of those questions are really helpful. I'll just pop them on the side here. Really helpful if you need to find out the information that you need in order to give an adequate quote. The next question that we are answering here is you, sneaker customizer. How much should you charge for your customs? Well, I'm about to tell you. It can be quite subjective, but there are a couple of elements that don't need to be subjective at all. That helps you get a little bit closer to finding the right price. Now, other customizers have provided advice on this on YouTube before, but I haven't really found their answers even remotely satisfying, especially back when I was starting customizing and I really wanted to have the answers. I find it's a lot more complicated than most people give it credit for. But like I said, let's start with the things that are not subjective and then build towards the things that might be a little bit more subjective. The first thing that I would consider are the costs involved in doing the project. So if we whip up one of these projects that we've got here, this is a mock-up that we've done that has never been turned into a pair of shoes yet, one-piece style. So if we have a look at this pair, there are quite a few materials that we're going to need here. First of all, we're going to need a light red, we're going to need a slightly darker red, we're going to need a yellow, we're going to need a sort of beige color, we're going to need a blue, and we're going to need a black and a white. So that's 7 colors. So If we don't have anything at all and we're just doing this design over here, we're going to go and need to buy 7 bottles of, say, Angelus paints. We'll just assume that we already have the paintbrushes. So just for interest's sakes, let's head on to Amazon and find out exactly what it would cost to do something like this. So Angelus leather paint. Let's just grab this kit. We'll get started with just this little kit. So $42. Let's just assume that this has all the colors that we're going to need. Then, of course, we're going to need a clear coat. That's something that we need in order to make sure the paint is durable. So for a 4-ounce bottle, we're looking at about $10 to $13, and for a small bottle's roughly 10. So let's just make it 10. So that's an extra $10. I'm not going to go into things like tape and paintbrushes and, paint palettes. We're not trying to start a business here. We're just trying to quote for a project. So getting started, you might see that you're already spending around $52 just on the materials you need for this specific project. Now, for a design like this, you should be able to use all of these paint pots multiple times to do multiple pairs. So we could go into the math and try and calculate exactly how much it's going to be for this pair, but I don't think that that's really practical. For the sake of discussion, let's just work off of this being the cost. $52 is your cost for all of your materials that you need to do this project. The next thing in terms of your materials or your expenses that you usually need to account for are the delivery fees. Now, this one will vary considerably depending on where you're sending the shoes after, but let's just tack on another $15 just in case it's somewhere local. So we're sitting at around $67, $70 expenses. Now, just a side note, I don't necessarily recommend buying a new bottle for every single custom pair that you do. What I recommend is you save a portion of your profits in your little business and you use those for maintenance and upkeep of your equipment as well as buying new paints. So typically, I wouldn't include the paints that I use as part of my expenses. I would say I made $100 on a pair, I'd keep 10% in a little kitty for the business, and that is what I'll use to buy new paints going forward. And if you repeat that process, you will always have enough to be able to supply your business and its material needs. But for the sake of an experiment, I'm just going to use an arbitrary value of, say, $30 as your expenses. We'll say, okay, you needed somewhat about $20 worth of materials and paint and tape and whatever, and then we'll add another $10 to do a little local delivery. So $40 off the bat, you need to be charging at least a minimum of $40 in order to break even. The next thing that you need to consider is the level of complexity and time that it is going to take to do this project. So let's go back to these designs. This Sonic the Hedgehog pair, for example, something like this, I would say, is medium complexity. The background and the foreground had to be done independently. There are characters on both sides. There are a couple of different colors and elements, like these little yellow loops would have taken a significant amount of time. And there are sprayed rubber midsoles as well. So the amount of time and complexity that goes into this pair, I would say it's a medium amount. And this is not going to take me 2 hours. This is probably going to take me around 6 hours, start to finish, I'd say, just as a guess. And obviously, you learn to estimate this better and better the longer you've been doing it. However, if you're doing something like this, this could be significantly quicker. If you've got a Cricut machine or you know how to do homemade stencils, something like this, I could do this in an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, start to finish. So I'm going to charge significantly less for something like this than I would with anything that's going to require those real slow, laborious details. Now, other customizers have recommended using the formula that you have your materials and then you have what you think you should earn per hour times over the number of hours it's going to take you. So they recommend that, if you were a freelancer and you were charging $20 an hour and it was going to take you 4 hours, they would say charge $20 for the pair because that's how much an hour of your time is worth. I think that is an awful way to explain it. to decide what your time is worth is initially like really arbitrary. And second of all, just because you feel like your time is worth that doesn't mean that your customer or anybody else would. That becomes really difficult. For example, if I believe that my time is worth $45, and I really do, I feel like I would charge around $45, maybe even $50 per hour for my work. So this Transformers pair, for example, this bordered on around 35 hours worth of work. What would I have to charge in order to justify $45 per hour for 35 hours? So 45 times 35, we're looking at $1,575. This is after the poor person has already bought the shoes. That's just obscene. Nobody is going to pay me that. Not for these, at least. Not for the audience in my country. So it really does depend on so many more subjective factors. What I believe the best formula to use is your costs plus your time and complexity element plus your value that you are bringing to this customer. And that is how you get your cost. And I'll show you an example of how this formula works. So say your costs are $30 and you're putting in $120 worth of time and effort. That is your fee as the artist who is doing the work. But the value of the work is not that great. You know that you're not that skilled yet. You are still new and your line work is not that great. Your color mixing is not that great. So the value you're going to add is, say, maybe another $20. So that would come up to $170, which is a reasonable amount of pay for a design like this. Let's have a look. Simple custom sneakers. Probably not going to find many simple ones here. So possibly your work is not really that exciting and you know that you're not providing any real finesse, so you might want to charge something like $20, and that makes the whole project price about $170, which is somewhat reasonable for a simple design. However, if we take the same formula and we say, okay, like our materials are going to cost $30 and it's going to take a significant amount more time, say perhaps we're doing something like, I don't know, like these dogs that we've done. There's quite a lot of detail in here. It's going to take a reasonable amount of time. We've got a background. We've got some faded paw prints. We've got some vinyl text here as well. So this might not be an epic level custom, but this is a decent medium kind of custom that's going to take a fair amount of time. There's a whole lot of coverage as well. So we might say we're going to charge $210 for something like this, just because we know that it's going to take probably around 10 hours, maybe 10 to 12 hours, all things considered. But because we know that this is a certain level or caliber of work that customers can't get anywhere else. If we have a look at what we have here in our business, there is nobody in my country that we have seen that comes even remotely close to this quality of work. And because of that, we know that we can command a slightly higher price. So I would add on an extra $200 and make this pair around $440. So we could add an extra element of cost because of our experience, because of our finesse, and because of where we stand in the market, making a pair like this somewhere around $400 in total, which I think is pretty fair considering all of the elements involved. Now, in the beginning, this is incredibly difficult, and that's why I made this formula. Because when you are not experienced, you can't be charging huge amounts even if you think that your work is really good. You have to build a reputation first, and then you can have confidence based on your previous success of making sales that, okay, maybe I'm going to charge a little bit more this time. Maybe I'm going to charge a little bit more in this area. To give you an example, when we first started customizing sneakers, here are a couple of our first pairs. We've got this Demon Slayer inspired pair. I mean, it's not great. We've got these American Eagle ones, which are pretty good. And we got some flowers. I don't know about you, but that doesn't really look like a very good flower to me. But, you know, in the beginning, the art wasn't quite there. And we were charging around, I don't know, something small like $50 or maybe even $30 to do stuff like this because we had no reputation. But now we won't even take on projects as simple as this or low value like this. We have positioned ourselves in such a way that when customers ask us to design some work, we will ask them all of those questions, of course, to see if they are going to be a reasonable match for us. And then we will go and do designs like this that are very comprehensive, and we'll say, okay, for a character on each side of the shoe, outsides and insides, this shoe is going to cost $350. So we won't even fiddle around with projects like this anymore. But it takes some time to get to that place where you can say, all right, we're moving away from this kind of project and we're taking on the slightly more advanced projects. And people need to be able to trust that you're able to do those kinds of projects. So it's been a really long journey going from $30. If you have a look at some of these pairs, that none of these really even look like Juice WRLD. So we would only be able to charge a very small amount for this because we haven't developed the reputation of doing really good work. But on the other hand, later on we're doing things like this after the time and experience has elapsed and people are more confident to pay higher prices for higher quality work. So my advice to you is that if you're getting started out, obviously you run the risk of charging too much and turning customers away, or charging too little and spending so many hours that's not really worth your time. My recommendation is charge a slightly more meager price in the beginning and see how that goes. And once you've developed a good case study of what people are willing to pay for in your area, you can incrementally make your customs more and more pricey as you go. Something that I recommend though, and this is my own personal strategy that has given me huge success in this industry, is when providing digital mock-ups or ideas of what the art's going to look like, I like to provide 3 different versions. The first version is super simple. It's the cheapest option. You're going to say, okay, what? You want to do a pair of Dragon Ball Z shoes? All right, so perhaps maybe just a black and white line drawing of one of the characters on the side of the shoes. And you say, okay, great, this is going to be $70. No problem. Then you target them in the middle with what you predict that they will likely want. So you do something that is good, really good, but not the best that you can do. So then you would pitch it at a medium coverage, something a little bit like this, where there is a character, possibly some background, maybe some other elements, and you target them at where you think that they will accept. Perhaps maybe for this one you'll say, okay, this is at $160. Okay, so we've just jumped from $70 to $160. Okay, so the gap is significant between these two options. Then you need to do an even more epic pair that is significantly better in terms of quality, but instead of doubling the price or something like that, you make it just small enough that it's a no-brainer to go for the upsale. So for example, you add in extra background elements or some glows or some fades or some extra details here and there. Then the customer sees this and they say, wow, there's a big difference between simple and medium, and there's a very small difference between medium and epic. And in my experience, that has been such a great tactic for upselling people. If you were to just have the really expensive option and the really cheap option, they might just go for the really cheap option. If you were going to have the really good pair and the epic pair, they might just go for the really good pair. So it's just a small way to show somebody who might not really have any idea of what they want. Here are some variations of what you could want, but also incentive to make them go for the higher option. And hey, there's the very real chance that you might pitch something at $200, for example, and they'll say, I was really only hoping to spend max $120. Then you can say, well, cool, I will remove some details to make sure that this design is suitable for your budget. That's great if a customer is willing to tell you their budget, which is very rare in my experience. But in short, what I'm trying to say in this video is that what we are doing is art. It's not just some stock standard thing that people can pick off the shelf. It's not something that every pair is going to be the same amount of time, detail, or cost. Customers typically don't understand this, so I've already told you a couple of ways that you can get more information from them to give them a more informed quote. And customers, just be aware of this if you ever want to order a pair of shoes. The next thing is that when you are pricing your work, you need to account for your materials, your time investment in terms of how much time and effort and detail it's going to require, but also what you can add to the scenario with your reputation and the level of finesse that you're able to command. Obviously, in the beginning, start small, but incrementally increase that number on the right-hand side of the formula as you get more experience. Perhaps maybe give it a few pairs or a few months and increase that amount. You don't have to tell the customer that's what it's for, but you will see that your prices will gradually go up as you develop more of a reputation and a better understanding of what your art is valued at. So I really hope that you found this helpful. I know that I just dumped a whole lot of information on you, but it's a really important element for you to consider if you want to run a custom sneaker business. Now, all that being said, this is not a hard and fast rule. This isn't some science that we can reasonably predict what people will buy. There are some factors that really make a huge difference to what you can charge for custom sneakers. And there are a bunch of artists in the world that completely ignore the advice of everything that I've said, and they have made huge amounts of money as a result. If you want to find more about that, you might want to watch this next video.